Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Superman Red Sun? Stick around and find out. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of the DC animated movie, Superman Red Sun. The synopsis on IMDb reads, "What if baby Kal-El's rocket landed not in Kansas, but in the Soviet Union?" That is the premise of this Elseworlds tale from DC Comics. And that really doesn't quite sum it up, because it's less than just like one thing being changed, because there ends up being an analog for Lana Lang and other characters of the DC universe that's clearly outside of the timeline that DC is currently, kind of set. And so it's more than just his rocket lands in a different spot. But that's the main thing. But there's a bunch of things that are different to kind of support that main premise. The story spans decades. It touches on numerous alternate versions of well-known DC characters like Lois Lane and Lex Luthor, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and a couple others, all interacting with a Superman who sees the flaws in the communist Russian government, but tries to correct those by taking charge, still ruling with an iron fist. And we see over the course of decades how various characters, well-known characters, but different versions of them from the DC universe, are kind of coming up against him as he is trying to maintain this iron-fisted rule. There's a good amount of action as a result of that. And there's also some time given to heavier dramatic moments. Not a lot, but, a little more than you would expect from these DC animated movies. And also some light, unfocused exploration of philosophy of government, and maybe a little bit of philosophy about human nature. Just a little bit. It's a light and fairly unfocused. It uses the time economically, as so many of these DC animated movies do, to tell what feels like a pretty big story. I feel like there's a lot of story packed into these DC movies, but I very rarely feel like they are rushed, or that the stories are cut short, or that I didn't have a full experience, and I think part of that is just from them being animated, from the tone of the stories. They just don't demand the sort of longer takes, the longer scenes, the longer shots that you would get from, you would expect from a live action movie, in order to allow the subtleties of an actor's performance to really kind of play out. I mean, we're just dealing with animation, cell animation, that is much more simple visually than a live actor. So, but that's where we need to talk about the, what the differences are in terms of animation for telling a story like this. And I think that this animation style, this just in general, the production of this, falls short for me of what I would have wanted for this story. Now, I've not read the original story. I was coming to this completely fresh, but just seeing what the story is as I watched it here, and not knowing, of course, if they changed anything. Sometimes they do change some significant plot elements when they adapt these classic stories to animated film. But just looking at the story for what it was and kind of stepping outside of that, I'm like, I think there's some things that would have worked better for me if they would have made some different artistic choices. One of them might have been kind of unavoidable, and that's the voice acting for children. The voice acting in all of the other characters is solid, and I've really come to expect that from these DC animated movies. But whenever a child opened their mouths, it was painfully obvious to me that it was an adult woman, an adult female actor that was trying to, come across as a child. That's a very common thing in animation, has been since, I think, the beginnings of animation, But it just felt more obvious to me somehow in this, to the point where, when one character was introduced, we first hear them off camera, and I was like, oh, what woman is the camera going to pan over and show us? No, it pans over and shows us a young boy, and I'm like, oh man, So then there were several scenes with kids that were also intended to be heavier scenes that were taken seriously. They were not playing for comedy at all, and so just how obvious it was that these were women doing the parts really just kind of pulled me out of those, moments that were intended to be much more serious and even weighty. But otherwise, nothing in the voice acting felt overdone or against tone, and though there weren't a ton of those scenes with child characters, and so on the whole, even though I'm not going to talk about it as much, on the whole, I found the voice acting great, and it didn't intrude on the tone. So very happy with it, as I almost always am with the voice acting in these DC animated movies. Let's talk about the visuals, though. It is, in the plus column, it is the same standard of quality that I think we've come to expect from these DC animated movies. Really solid stuff. The problem is, for me, it looked very much like all the DC animated movies we've seen up to this point. And for this script and this story, I would have liked a very different visual style. I would have liked maybe some more textures to the different cells, of the characters and stuff, and just grit things up a bit, or dirty them up, or maybe use more jagged lines or more exaggerated lines or something in how the characters were drawn, some different art style. I don't know exactly, but it felt kind of vanilla and simplistic compared to the tone and the themes of this story. And I was left in a place where I either wanted a live action version of this, where we could see something much more nuanced performances from the actors, and it could feel more gritty and less, I don't want to say childlike, because it's not an animation style that is catering to kids, but compared to a live action movie, it has a more, it leans more in the direction of young looking than what you would see if this was adapted into a live action movie, for sure. So live actors would have been nice, or still images that had a grittier art style, because the kind of thing I'm asking for in the visuals would be admittedly really hard to pull off in animation. It'd be much easier to do it in like kind of a watercolor painted style or something like that, in still images. And in still images, paired with my imagination, it can work a lot better. My imagination can fill in the gaps and really create some nuance, But in this middle ground where it's animated and it has kind of a vanilla look to it, it just didn't feel right to me for the tone of the content. Now, as far as themes go, first I'll just make a minor observation. I don't know if this was in the original work or not, but every character was seriously flawed, which I found interesting, to kind of like, oh man, no, this character is definitely not totally good. They're not even like half good, or, they're really messed up, even though they're kind of wanting some good things, And this character, who is typically bad, is, not entirely bad. In fact, they're a lot good, but none of them were like, they were all a very mixed bag, except for the female characters, the very prominent female characters, Lois Lane and Wonder Woman. Both seemed to be favored by the writers, not having any traits that I think the writers would consider dysfunctional. So that was just kind of interesting and of note to me. It didn't feel like something they were really hammering, but it was something that I took notice of. The political themes, I think, are the more obvious thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation. It didn't seem to be like any kind of pointed, strong political messaging. The script showed both the good aspirations and flawed executions of a communist government and a capitalist government. What those governments aspire to that are good, and how they both go, really pretty south. Now, in this movie, they definitely showed the communist government going a whole lot more south than the capitalist government, but neither did, they didn't say that the capitalism is like the, ultimate way of life or whatever. The real problem identified in human flourishing is, in this script, I think, is human will itself. As Wonder Woman says, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, the better world that humans want has to come from within. In other words, they have to want it instead of it being forced upon them. And that's true in that we all need to want a better world in order to get a better world. But I would add to that our own will can never be enough to produce this ideal world, because we are broken. And so even if we want You know, even in the ideal scenario where we want a better world, where we actually knew what a better world was, because our moral compasses are broken enough that, like, sometimes the things we think of as like morally good are actually not good, and but even if we all were on the same page and were right in our thinking about what is good, we wouldn't be able to execute on that because we just can't bring ourselves to live out the selfless lives that we would need to in order for that kind of utopia to ever materialize. I think that, though, the notion that's expressed by Wonder Woman does remind me of the choice that God gives us. You know, He wants to create and plans to create and will create a flawless, perfect world of love and selflessness that everyone in it will love to be a part of. They'll be completely fulfilled. But He's not forcing it on us, and that's really key. He only wants that world to be filled with people who want to be a part of it, and who are willing to say, yeah, I can't do that. I can't do that. I need some things in me to be fixed, and I need to give myself over to that process and to someone else who can fix me, namely God. So so I think there's potentially some stuff there that could bring about some worthwhile thought or conversation. But since I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, if I were a time traveler, I would go back in time and say, Peter, skip this one. Instead, consider rewatching or catching up on the DC animated movies, in the shared continuity of the DC movies in the last 10 years, in preparation for Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, which is going to be the next movie they release. You got to see a preview of that when you rented Superman Red Son. Looks really cool, and by all accounts of those involved, is the culmination, kind of like the Avengers Endgame of the DC animated movies, and is going to be bringing this whole thing to a climactic close, after which they'll reboot in some way. I don't know, but it looks really cool, and so maybe start getting caught up on the in-animation continuity DC movies in preparation for that. This movie is going to remind you that you generally like DC animated movies and that you really like the DC universe and the characters in it, but this movie itself is not going to be very interesting to you. It's rated PG-13. I was going to say it's rated MPAA. It has an MPAA rating of PG-13 for violent content, bloody images, suggestive material, language, thematic elements, and some smoking. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected to what we're doing. And anything else that you want to do to stay connected or share this content with others, I would really be grateful for. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. More information about the benefits at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then, I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We've got a ton going on here at Spirit Blade Productions and Christian Geek Central, including our in-depth Bible study for geeks, movie, game, and other entertainment reviews or commentary, live streams, Christian geek news, original audio dramas, and tons more. And on top of all that, you can become a Spirit Blade insider with an influential voice and get access to exclusive content and rewards. It's your involvement as a patron that will keep all of this going and growing, so I want to thank you for your consideration in that. For more information, please check out our Patreon page through the link below at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Thanks for listening.